Everybody said you can't franchise the internet.
I've always admired trailblazers, the rare individuals who choose to make things happen versus watch and wonder what happened. They're sort of wired to step off the beaten path. They head in uncharted territory, knowing full well that risk and reward walk hand in hand. They grab a torch, but not just to light their way, but often to light the way for others.
If the internet existed back then, the ability to learn anything from anyone, anywhere in the world is unprecedented in human history.
Some travel solo, savoring the challenge and coming home and saying, look what I've uncovered and discovered. Others are more collaborative.
Really, the question comes down to if you want to grow.
And today's guest is one of those true trailblazers. Serial entrepreneur, he's a futurist, a venture capitalist. And if that's not enough, he's also on a mission to end child poverty. He's someone who's lit the way for thousands of entrepreneurs to follow. And he continues to chart new frontiers.
And metaphorically speaking, there are hidden Rembrandts within many businesses.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated. Dan Monaghan, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
It's great to be here, Tony.
Very often I start with what are the roots, the foundation of the individual that chooses to follow this path in life. And when I looked at the pedigree of your family, it was interesting. Your dad was a janitor and your mom was a part-time nurse. Very often people sort of accept that as the status quo. What was going on within that family that said blazing a trail versus maybe the predictability of those jobs was going to be how you were ordained?
In many ways, scarcity is a good restraint that helps drive desire or innovation. And I think that was a part of what was meaningful to me when I was young. I mean, I had to have a paper route. If I wanted to buy myself a tape recorder, if I wanted to buy some gadgets at the store, I had to figure out a way to make that money. So it was either a paper route, it was 2 paper routes, it was a Globe and Mail, a Kitchener Record, then it was selling popsicles, on the street. Like this concept of being able to sell something and make a profit was kind of, I think, unlocked a world of possibility for me because I knew that could ultimately be unlimited. You and I are patterned. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are kind of wired that way, that came from nothing and wanted to make something. But do you think that's missing in society? Do you think that's missing even the narrative of Canada, is this sense of the need to earn our way forward versus feel that we're going to be taken care of no matter what? I do think that there's a softness, whether it's in our life or whether it's in our society. Sometimes prosperity and success can lead to softness. People are just not used to the striving, used to the grind, and really takes away the flame from a lot of people. That it's not just that they're not working hard, but they're missing the joy of what working hard can do. I laugh because here you are, got 2, selling popsicles and 2 paper routes, but you're dreaming of something bigger even as a 13-year-old, that you think that owning a Dairy Queen franchise would be something that would really help serve your financial needs. But was it also just your appetite needs? I mean, I've always loved ice cream. That's something my mom and I shared. We were both ice cream fanatics, still am. But, after the baseball games, it was a bit of a tradition every month or so, like the team would go to the Dairy Queen. And I saw the lineup outside of Dairy Queen, and it was just like it was always there. And I just thought, whoever owns this thing is making a ton of money. So that's where I set my sights on owning a Dairy Queen as my future vision for myself. As a kid, though, a lot of people would just go and just be, am I going to get the banana split or the milkshake? You're looking at the traffic outside. Do you think entrepreneurship is something that is just wired within individuals? Or was it, again, the kid that said, yeah, I got my tape recorder, but here's what I want next? Well, I do think that the external constraint around not having things, and then all of a sudden you see this path that entrepreneurship can actually help me get those things. I do think that was a really important connection of dots. But ever since I was a kid, I was always like building gadgets. I mean, if you asked me when I was, in second grade what I wanted to be when I grew up, I'd say an inventor. What I didn't realize at the time is that an entrepreneur is really an inventor. you're just an inventor of businesses. You're connecting dots and applying innovation, but it's to serve the customer. So it's really today, I think I'm still an inventor.
And where did that switch go from I'm inventing something that's kind of cool for me to I want to invent something to solve an unmet need or to create a better mousetrap?
I think most of the businesses that I've created over the years all began with me solving a problem for myself first. And then in solving that problem, I recognize, wow, how big is the total addressable market here in terms of others that have that same problem?
So speaking of beginning, and I don't want to lose your passion for ice cream because at 19, you started Dickie D franchise.
It's funny because I remember, being 12, 13 years old, I used to drive my bicycle to a used bookstore and I'd always buy the Entrepreneur magazines and I'd lay in bed reading them. And there was the Entrepreneur Franchise 500. And I would always look at where is Dairy Queen on those, on that listing. Little did I know that someday I would actually start a franchise company that would be listed in the Franchise 500. But it just turned out that putting myself through university, I needed to have some money to do that. And I was at the job fair at university, Wilfrid Laurier, and they had, it was basically College Pro, a franchise, or a Dickie D ice cream franchise, and I chose Dickie D. Ultimately, I ended up buying College Pro, the franchise or the company, but I was an ice cream bicycle franchisee.
We went full circle with ice cream to Dickie D. You're saving for a tape recorder as a kid, and next thing you know, you're producing your own content and cassette after university. So unpack that.
It was actually shortly after university, I started a publishing company with my younger brother. And one of the things that I did is I would go into the studio every month. I would consume as much content as I can. Back in this was before the internet. CD-ROMs were around then. So I'd read magazines. I'd devour CD-ROMs. I'd pull together everything that's going on in society, technologies, politics. And then I'd go into the studio and I would record this 30-minute or 45-minute audio cassette. We called it the Inside Edge. It was really a podcast before its time. We had a list of subscribers, and we would then put the cassette in the mail every month, and then thousands of these people would get this kind of accelerated learning thing. And what I was talking a lot about, this would have been around 92, 93, I was talking a lot about the information superhighway. It was in all the news, but nobody knew if it was going to be a satellite network, microwaves. Some people thought it could be this internet thing, which was far too slow at the time. And then in 93, when Mark Andreessen and a team of researchers invented the World Wide Web, I said, this is going to be the information superhighway. So the first thing I wanted to do was build a website for our publishing company. And what I found is that the people who knew how to code that website, it looked terrible. And the designers who could make it look really good, it took forever. And I'm kind of dating myself here, but pages used to download on the screen very slowly. And even if I could get those two guys on the same page, neither of them knew anything about internet marketing, how to drive traffic to that site. So I had to figure all this stuff out for myself. And then once I did, I thought, other companies are going to need this. And that was what gave birth to WSI, which has become the world's largest digital agency network.
Talk to me about WSI. It's, once again, you're looking at solving your own problem, looking at an unmet need. And in this case, you couldn't have had any possible idea how big that need would be, but you decided to go all in.
We thought about growing it through franchising, but I knew that this was going to be an international phenomenon. And it's not something you could just be Canada's leader. It was kind of a bit of a winner take all. We just went global with it pretty quickly. In fact, back in those days, British Airways had a ticket where you could, for $6,500, you could buy a ticket and you could go around the world, stop as many times as you wanted, as long as you kept going east. And so we would go from country to country, city to city, evangelizing this thing called the internet and speaking to business audiences. And I remember I tried to make something complex a little bit simple. And I said, how many of you had a fax number on your business card 5 years ago? And most people would just kind of, no, didn't have one. How many have it today? The room, everyone raises their hand. I say, in the next 5 years, everyone's going to have an email address on their business card. And I get these blank stares. Like people just didn't get it. But obviously in time, the world started to get it. Back to that Entrepreneur magazine, it was probably about 4 years later that I pull out Entrepreneur magazine, and there we are, not only in the franchise 500, but we're the number one internet franchise in the world.
But let's talk about the friction points, because again, another part of the DNA of an entrepreneur, you must have had dozens, if not hundreds of people say, Dan, you cannot franchise this concept of a digital marketing agency.
Everybody said you can't franchise the internet. Back in those days, we actually had a very strategic decision we had to make because there were a lot of franchise companies that were ISPs. They were basically setting up, pods to connect to the internet. And we decided to not do that because we believed at some point that was going to be commoditized. And so instead we would create the content that would be on the internet. But people would say, you can't franchise the internet. They didn't understand what we were trying to do. But there were still a lot of complexities. I mean, when we sold the master franchise for Saudi Arabia, like just, being able to show, skin or shoulders or things like that, like the content, our eyes are being opened. It was emerging at that stage. So all these kinds of issues are starting to come up that had never been dealt with before in terms of copyrights and patents and all kinds of privacy. So there was a lot of things to figure out kind of in real time.
How old are you when you're doing all this?
I was 27.
Did you ever think you were an imposter? I mean, you're getting on this plane, you're traveling around the world, you're sort of establishing the future, getting people to try to buy into it. Did you, or were you just sort of wired in a way that this is my calling, my destiny, and I couldn't care what age I was?
Rolling the clock between university and when I started WSI, I was in a direct selling organization and I was doing a lot of recruitment of salespeople. That's when I really felt like I was an imposter. When I was 21, 22, I was still getting asked for ID. Like I remember sitting on a plane going to a company conference and I'm like 22 at the time. And the lady comes up to me and says, how old are you? And I said, I'm 22. Why do you ask? She's, oh, sorry. You have to be 16 to sit in the exit row. And so like, I've always looked, at least when I was a kid, I looked younger than I was. So when I'm like 22, 23, and I'm recruiting these older people, I really felt like an imposter. And my manager took me aside one day and he drew a half circle on the blackboard back then. And he said, what is that? Is that concave or convex? I knew it was a bit of a trick question. I said, if you look at it one way, it's concave. The other way, it's convex. He said, exactly. If you think you're too young, you're right. If you think you're not, you're right. Interestingly enough, a couple of years later, myself and my younger brother became, the top national marketing directors in that company in the country. Everyone started coming up to me saying, oh yeah, you can do this because you're young, you've got energy. And so I'm thinking in my head, I can't do it because I'm young. Next thing I do it and everyone says, oh yeah, you did it because you're young. So by the time I started WSI, I was looking at youth as an asset. It was part of my identity, really.
The early days, and so whatever you're saying is the essential truth. But the world changes. I mean, with decades of tech shifts, lots of just changes and dynamics. How did you keep WSI relevant, authentic, something of value that franchisees would say, I'm glad I have this relationship with you because I am in turn bringing value to my clients?
Imagine you're a fast food restaurant and every 3 years, your entire menu board changes. It changes from hamburgers to Mexican and then from Mexican to sushi. So I'm not talking about changing a few products. I'm talking about entire changes to the menu board. And now you've got to figure out your supply chains and you got to figure out your marketing systems. That's what it's like in the internet because we go from building websites. I mean, in the beginning, this was before Google. It was 2 years before Google. There was no search engines. So people used to buy the internet yellow pages. It was a book like a couple inches thick, and that's how you'd find websites. Then SEO comes along, and now it's like a whole new business. And then e-commerce comes along, and then social media, et cetera. And so what we've had to do from the very beginning is build a learning organization. The business is very agile, and the way we learn from our franchisees, because we've got hundreds of data points on the front lines around the world, the question is, are we learning from them? And so the way I'll explain this to people in franchising is I'll say, don't forget that the Big Mac, the filet of fish, the quarter pounder, Ronald McDonald, the breakfast at McDonald's, the Egg McMuffin, I can go on and on. These were all franchisee ideas. And McDonald's had the wisdom to listen to their franchisees. So we learned so much from this knowledge network of our franchisees. We've had 43 major franchise organizations that were at one time one of our key competitors at WSI, usually about 3 at any given time. And some of them publicly funded. They're all gone. But I attribute that to the fact that we've been able to be agile and, as a learning organization, continue to reinvent ourselves.
Dan, I mean, you could just run this trapwire forever. It's succeeding, it's populating, it's a learning organization. But you, again, take another move on the chessboard when you create CSG and this sort of sense that I now understand the franchise world. Therefore, instead of just helping people market, I'm going to start buying some of these models. Is that fair in terms of the move?
I mean, it was a bit of an arbitrage strategy because I thought, like, I'm creating so much value for so many companies as their digital agency within WSI. What if I was actually able to do that within other organizations as well? Like, lead generation is what we do really well. So I launched Clear Summit Group with the vision of acquiring additional early stage franchisors and then developing them. And the first company we acquired was Tutor Doctor. It was an in-home tutoring company, and they needed to generate leads. When we acquired the company, this was 2007, 2008, they were still generating their leads in the yellow pages, right? So we just applied the latest of, Google paid search advertising, and all of a sudden the business exploded. And so that was part of the thing is, acquiring additional franchise systems, partnering with those founders, and then helping them scale the business. What we brought to the table was obviously capital, a blueprint for how to do it, but also a team of Navy SEALs, that our shared service, the best in each of those different sections or categories to help professionalize that business.
How do you know you're picking the right founder? Because for you to come in with this Navy SEALs approach, they in turn also have to listen generously, much like you said McDonald's did to their franchise. Whereas they have to listen to you and say, this makes a lot of sense versus fight you because you're now wandering into what they viewed to be their baby.
If I could talk to my earlier self, I would basically ask myself that question because you've nailed it, Tony. It is the toughest thing. Can they shed their skin? Are they willing to grow? Are they willing to evolve? Or do they believe that they've actually already nailed it? In the same way that if I was hiring a CEO or a president, we go through a very comprehensive psychometric process. I've got a whole framework for how I interview them. Like, it's not about buying the company. It's really about I'm partnering with this founder. So in most cases, it's worked out, not always. It's interesting, in Silicon Valley, they have this venture capital fund called Founders Fund. And what made them so unique is that they would say, we don't fire the founders. Because in venture capital, they almost always fire the founders at some point in time. And these guys are like founders. And they said, we know how to work with founders because we were founders. And it's been a very successful fund. We think of ourselves that way for franchising. We are founders working with founders, but it's easier said than done.
And in terms of the impact you've made, I mean, you mentioned moving up on the list of the top 500, but you were acknowledged with the William Rosenberg Leadership Award. And from what I understand, that is the MVP of MVP. So tell me a little bit about the award, how it cemented your legacy in franchising, and did it matter to you, given the fact that Lifetime Achievement Awards for someone like you it's way too early to be thinking that way?
The International Franchise Association does an incredible job of sharing best practices and learning across the entire franchise ecosystem. Franchisors, franchisees, suppliers, they all work together for the betterment of franchising. And the Education Foundation within the IFA is where a lot of that learning is inculcated. And just over time, I spent a lot of time working with the foundation, lecturing at Cornell and Georgetown and all kinds of universities on franchising. And so every year they have an award that they recognize for people that have made an impact. The William Rosenberg Award was named after the founder of the International Franchise Association, William Rosenberg, who was the founder of Dunkin' Donuts. So some of the legends in franchising have received this award over the years. So for me, it was more humbling than anything else to say, like, how can I be in the same room with these guys? But it's really opened a lot of doors for me. The opportunity to learn at the feet of some of these legends. That's what's been especially rewarding, is how I can learn from. The teaching is part of it. I think it was Stephen Covey who once said that the best way to learn is to teach.
When we come back, Dan and I take our conversation about AI and its impact on the world to the next level. We talk about fears, implications, and also the exciting possibilities it will bring. Hi, it's Tony Chapman. I want to give a big shout out to RBC for everything they do to support small business owners across Canada. Starting and growing a business is tough, especially in today's world of uncertainty. But when I had the idea to launch Chatter AI, I turned to RBC. They didn't just open an account for me. They sat down, they listened, and gave me the guidance and tools I need to turn my vision into reality. Today, I rely on RBC's small business solutions to navigate the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. Whether it's banking, financing, or expert advice, they're there every step of the way. Because ideas happen at RBC, and small business matters to you and me. Visit rbc.com/smallbusiness and turn your dreams into reality.
Imagine you're a fast food restaurant and every 3 years your entire menu board changes. It changes from hamburgers to Mexican, and then from Mexican to sushi. So I'm not talking about changing a few products. I'm talking about entire changes to the menu board. And now you've got to figure out your supply chains, and you got to figure out your marketing systems. That's what it's like in the internet.
Today, my special guest is Dan Monaghan. And the more I spoke with him, the more impressed I am at his brain power, his appetite for life, his understanding of the business of doing business, how quickly he adopts to new technologies like AI, and he's one of the most extraordinary entrepreneurs that I've ever met. Before we move into AI, because I really want your point of view on that, tell me a little bit about Make Child Poverty history, and in turn, what you're learning from that to help prepare all youth for what's coming.
We partnered many years ago, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago with World Vision. We came up with a program across the world with our franchisees where we said, for every child you sponsor, we'll sponsor one. And then we expanded that beyond that to our customers as well. So we've sponsored tens of thousands of kids over the years corporately, and then that's multiplied through all those that our franchisees and customers have sponsored. It's kind of leveraging the global nature of our business, because many of these areas where they have the ADPs, the area development programs for World Vision, are areas where we have franchisees. So we've really partnered in all those markets with our franchisees. We've had golf tournaments where the sun never goes down in the WSI tournament, because it just keeps moving around the world. So it's a way of how we can kind of move from success to significance, not just us, but our franchisees. And it's been super rewarding and meaningful to everybody.
But when I look at South Africa with youth unemployment, possibly 40%, I think Canada is being generous in saying it's only 16%. What can we do with all that you've learned to prepare our youth for a future that's going to be so different than the future that most parents thought was guaranteed with a university education and some semblance of hard work?
I see that really from two perspectives, and the common thread across both perspectives is education. There is a world that was not really easily anticipated for those that are in those developing markets, where today, with access to information, access to education, we can literally level the playing field around the planet. So there's such a brighter future for these kids. If they can get internet connectivity, they can learn anything. And we have a global workforce at WSI and our various companies around the world. So we're giving jobs to these people everywhere around the world. Now, I get the sense that your question was geared towards the uncertainty of our youth today in North America, because the world's going to change, right? And that's just because we're now moving into this global playing field. While that creates an opportunity for kids in South Africa or the Philippines or wherever else, it also means that we're now competing with the best of the planet, not just our city or our country. And again, the common theme is education. I mean, I remember when I was putting myself through university, I delivered pizzas and I took out the back seat of my car and I built a little library. So we used to have those milk crates back in the day and I filled them up with all these books. And so I'd sit there waiting for my pizza, but I'd be reading a book, Think and Grow Rich or, The Magic of Believing or whatever, Norman Vincent Peale's books. So I'd be reading all this stuff while I'm waiting for the pizza. If the internet existed back then, like the ability to learn anything from anyone, anywhere in the world is unprecedented in human history. Really, the question comes down to if you want to grow, the learning, the knowledge is there for you, whether you're in Canada or you're in South Africa. But there is an element of initiative that if we don't reach for it, then someone else will.
Let me take it back to one of the first comments you meant. Prosperity often leads to softness. My experience, I was on the board of my kids' schools when they were still in high school. I have young nieces. I'm seeing a lot of softness in schools. We're spending a lot of time apologizing for our past. We're spending a lot of time learning what was the status quo 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Our school calendar is still on an agricultural cycle where the rest of the world's moving on. What's it going to take for North America to recognize that these kids are going to compete for jobs in the cloud globally and against machine learning, which we're going to get to in a minute? We have to completely revamp the way we inspire, motivate, teach, celebrate success, celebrate winners and competitiveness.
Oftentimes there's a correlation between the industries that are most regulated and the ones that are the most inefficient and the least likely to innovate with technology. And education is one of those. Obviously, healthcare is another. A number of years ago, I had an opportunity. I was at Harvard sitting in a room with the dean. There was maybe 8 or 10 of us. And he was admitting kind of like education has not changed in over 100 years. He said, we're still standing at the front of the room with a blackboard and a piece of chalk. We've got to come to terms with that. And I don't know the education world has really come to terms. I almost think there's going to be this leapfrogging right over the present day into the future. There's an opportunity for us at Tutor Doctor, but there's also a risk and an element of disruption because today AI can effectively tutor kids in some subjects more effectively than tutors, right? So we now have to level up, just like the programmer has to level up to become an engineer, the tutor has to level up and become an academic coach. As humans, our roles have to change and level up. And the same is the case for educators. And I don't know that that's going to happen under the government-run system. I think it's going to be entrepreneurs and then parents that recognize that there's just a better way.
I looked at how many of the developing countries went and said, why put copper in the ground when we can go wireless? And they leapfrogged legacy. And to me, the question is, you said, how is that leapfrog going to happen? Is it going to be to the point where we can no longer afford to subsidize institutions that teach an old way because parents and dollars must go to prepare our kids a different way? And it'll be interesting to see how far we have to go before that inertia there's enough energy against that inertia that it evokes change. What I loved about researching you is the different tightropes you've been on, but even as a thought leader, somebody that was, without question, world-renowned as an expert on franchising and digital marketing, very quickly, you manifested that to saying, I'm also a thought leader in AI. What I'd want to do is get a sense of what does that mean? What are you bringing to the audience? And I want to begin with one quote, which I think is your superpower, which is metaphors. And one of the things you talk about is comparing unused data to hidden Rembrandts.
Imagine you're purchasing a home, as is, all contents included, and you walk into the home, you look around, and it's $200,000, and you think, it's not a bad value. You walk up to the second floor and then ultimately to the attic, and you see lying against the rafters is this painting. And you got a little background in art history, and you look a little closer, and you see it's actually a Rembrandt. Now, all of a sudden, the value of that house goes from 200,000 to 200 million. And so simply because we found a hidden Rembrandt in the attic. And metaphorically speaking, there are hidden Rembrandts within many businesses. And data is an example of one of those hidden Rembrandts. It might also be processes. There's other things that can be hidden Rembrandts. But I'll give you an example. It might be a company that has thousands of tickets, from people, service inquiries that people have sent in asking questions. Well, they could take that data and instantly, feeding it into AI, instantly create vast amounts of content, could create FAQs, and could create 1,000 pages of content in the click of a few buttons. And now all of a sudden they're driving a lot of SEO traffic, new customers, new leads into their business. No one else could do that because no one else had the data, but they had the data about all the questions and answers that they've given to customers over the years. That's just one example of a hidden Rembrandt. But one of the things we do when we speak to business people is we want to learn about their business and find out where are the hidden Rembrandts within their business.
And the other thing you talk about is much more positivity versus a lot of people that are calling, the end of jobs with AI. You're saying it replaces tasks, but not necessarily jobs. So I'd love you to unpack that.
That is changing very quickly. One of the things that people very quickly, once they really understand AI or they begin using it, the first thing they do is they start cranking out tons of content, right? Remember, it used to be that if you had an employee that came and you're the CEO or president and they present you with a 75-page document, a strategic plan, you'd go, wow, they worked so hard on this document. Today, people can crank that out in seconds. And a lot of it is what I call AI slop. So there is this tendency to create very low quality, useless garble that AI cranks out. So we believe, our tagline at WSI is embrace digital, stay human. And we believe in this premise of a human in the loop is critical to how we use AI, because we need to be discerning in how we write the prompts, discerning in our assessment of what comes out of that. And so we're not really going to replace a job. We might replace the research task. I mean, it's incredible what, with OpenAI Deep Research or Google has their version, Anthropic has their version. I mean, we're talking about days or weeks of researching that could be done in minutes. But what do we do with that? How do we as a human use that? Ultimately, as we move into an agentic world with agents, it is going to replace, companies will reorganize their work. So there might be some jobs that go away, but we still need humans to run the agents, at least at this point.
And talk to me about one of the articles I read where you talked about the coming searchquake.
Gartner says that by the end of 2025, that Google will have lost 25% of its traffic. By the end of 2026, it'll have lost 50% of its traffic. And whether they've got the year right or not, or the percentage right, directionally, this is hugely disruptive to the way people find answers, right? I mean, my 82-year-old mom, I put ChatGPT on her phone and I just said, use ChatGPT whenever you're using Google, and just to begin to build that behavior. A lot of people don't realize you can call 1-800-ChatGPT. And a voice now you're communicating with voice AI for free. So the way people answer questions, so that what that means is that a lot of the traffic coming to clients' websites is just evaporating, because traditional informational searches, which used to make up about half of companies' traffic in many cases, is gone. So there's really three phases of this, what I call a search quake. Number one is people are now creating AI-based content, and it is a lot of AI slop, but it is attracting search engines. Number two, what we call zero click, where people aren't even clicking anymore because Google is answering the question up top in their AI snippets, or people are going to ChatGPT or other large language models. But where we're really focused on is that third phase. And that is when people are now wanting to get ranked in ChatGPT. When people are looking for best roofing companies in Toronto, how are you being ranked or referenced in ChatGPT, in Anthropic, in Gemini? And it's a different methodology for how, so traditional SEO people, they're like history unless you're following the new way. And that's really where we've got a new book coming out, SEO in the Age of AI, and it's all focused on this total shift.
And I want to wrap up the interview with your advice to my young listeners or parents that have young listeners at home in terms of how do they stand for and stand out going forward, given all that you know and all that you see, so that they have an opportunity to get the kind of purpose and passion you found in your life.
So one of our businesses, it's called CodeWiz, and where we teach coding and robotics to kids generally 7 to 13 years old. And while we teach things like Unity and Raspberry Pi and, Roblox and different Python, different platforms and technologies, what we're really looking to do is inculcate the more important, the drivers of success in life. So things like resilience, things like teamwork, things like curiosity. And I think as parents, it's not so much about teaching the kid math, because a lot of that's going to change, or teaching them, it's embedding those broader values around, and curiosity being a huge one, because if we can ask the question, the answer is out there, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's in AI, whether that's through a mentor. The world is in our pocket now. We're one click away from the answer to anything. So how we breed that adaptability and curiosity in our kids is really, I think, most important.
Dan, I always wrap up with my 3 takeaways. The first one is one I just mentioned. I think you're a master of metaphors. I think this world is incredibly complex, chaotic, and it's very easy to just try to turn it off and to scroll to the latest TikTok or something that kind of just amuses you. But when you use things like hidden Rembrandts, AI slop, Searchquake, it creates that itch. It makes people want to know more. And I think that's a great lesson for people to frame the path they're blazing in life, the things that they're interested in, into metaphors, because it creates that curiosity, but also reminds people that it is possible. The second thing that I really like is just from the very beginning, whether it's, fashioning your car so you had books in it, going to a Dairy Queen after your baseball game and looking at traffic, you are one of the most curious people. It's not just curiosity in the sense of why is this happening, it's curiosity in the sense of how can we do it better. And I think that if every minute of every day that people went through life and just looked around at what is the status quo as it's presented and saying, is there a better way? Can I shorten? Can I improve? Can I find an unmet need? I don't think it's just the skill set of an entrepreneur. To me, it's a necessary skill set going forward, because the status quo as it is not going to create the opportunities that it might have created in the past. And then I guess the third thing is just every time I introduced a new tightrope that you went on in your life, and I go back from the franchise to the cassettes to digital marketing to franchising digital marketing to the businesses you bought, you always have a smile on your face. It is a smile that we all want on our face throughout life, and even someone of your age. And I'm not saying that presenting you as old, but you're seasoned in experience and you're not resting on your laurels. You're still looking at the next tightrope. And AI presented itself and you couldn't wait to jump on and figure that out and go across the world and speaking on it. And I think that's another thing that, as you said, that prosperity often leads to softness. With you, prosperity didn't lead to softness. It created an insatiable appetite for more prosperity, but I don't believe it was financial prosperity to you. I think it's that intellectual and emotional that you're wired for. And for all of that and more, I just think you're so many lessons you've unpacked today that I've learned from, and I think my listeners will benefit from as well.
I don't know that there's ever been a more exciting time to be alive. The world is going to change massively in the next number of years, and it's going to change very quickly. So speed and magnitude are really what's before us. And if you're approaching the future with curiosity and a desire to learn and connect dots, I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be alive.
What's the best way for people to find out more about you and some of the things that you've written or some of the things that you're doing?
They could connect with me on LinkedIn. Just Google me and you'll find my LinkedIn connection. You could go to danmonaghan.com. Any of our websites, but those would all be great places to connect with me.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.